But I am going to say this for all of you who are here. I'm going to remove this, but I'm up here, so I'm hoping that's going to be okay because it's so much easier to talk rather than, so far away because this is a.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
I just want to make sure, you always have one or two people like, no. Well, everyone, welcome. My name is Twan Dean here at Triton College. I'm a full-time faculty member here in the College Readiness Department, so it will be something else, and mathematics as well too. Full-time faculty member here at Triton College since 2014. However, as an adjunct, I've been here longer than that. Today I'm going to be talking about diversity and global learning, and it's dear to me because of the fact that I actually do this in my class a lot, especially when I took over and started teaching in my first introduction to teaching Math 101, which is our quantitative literacy course in the math department, and it incorporates these ideas that we have that I'm going to be talking about. It's all about cultural understanding, and it's about making our students not only a college graduate, but a college world graduate. And let me define what I mean by that, a college world graduate. I mean in the sense that they are just not knowledgeable in that particular area, like medicine or education or mathematics or English, but they're knowledgeable in different areas that will relate to different areas within their lives. Also, if they go to different countries, they'll have an understanding of that. Every country in this case may not have the same education that we have, but we're trying to make them somewhat understandable in the sense that every student here in the United States, especially here at Triton College, understands what's outside the institution, what's outside the community, what is outside the state, what is outside the United States as well, the country, and what's outside the continent, what is understandable in our global economy. So with that, for all of you, I have the following things that I'm going to be talking about. And please do, if you want to share in some opinions as well too. Define what global and diversity in higher education. We're also going to be looking at some global learning outcomes in this case, which I felt it was important because the fact that we all have our different outcomes based on our disciplines that we're teaching, but it's just incorporating those additional things that you want to have within your classroom for cultural understanding and global understanding as well too. And then have an opportunity for you as the audience, especially online, if you are participating in Blackboard, to write in some questions. And also here in the classroom, I'm about to say the studio audience, to ask any questions as well too, because this is all about we as instructors incorporating these different ideas, and is also expanding on our best practices so that we have our students understand not only cultural diversity in this case, but also have a global understanding. I know, repeating of the words global understanding is very important because a lot of times you're going to have students ask that question. And one of the things that I had in my class is that I use the definition that is used from Association of American Colleges and Universities. So I have one of my students in this case read what I define global learning. And I also have my student to read out loud what I define learning, because a lot of times students think of learning in this case is learning just the discipline itself. It's learning about everyone that we deal with and things that we deal with. So me as a math instructor, I tell my students that you're not just learning mathematics and the applications and the concepts, but you're learning how they actually associate to things that you would do outside your discipline or outside your degree or outside your career and relate it to your real life. In fact, it is one of the importance of global understanding, relating it to real world activities, which I know we all do in our classrooms, but we also want to expand on that as well too. So with that, I also want to look at the cultural diversity within the United States and exploring not only just the religion, ethnicity, and sexuality. And I know this is not going to be a philosophy course, but we also want to incorporate those things in our classroom because we deal with those every day. We see those students that come in with those questions about gender, those questions about culture, religion, race, religion, and I said it twice, but we just have those questions. And those things can be incorporated in our classroom so that our students have a better understanding. Our job as higher educational professors or guiders or facilitators is to have our students understand and appreciate the world around them. It's also looking at some of the resources that you can use within your classes as well too. I know there's tons of resources online that you can use within your classrooms to help them understand, but there's also tons of resources out there to incorporate or infuse into your discipline. Me as a math instructor, those are things I'm going to be looking at. But again, as the audience here, if you want to participate and say some of the things that you do within your classes that deal with global learning and cultural learning as well too. Integrating the understanding of the logic of culture. And it's understanding that most people think of culture in this case as a single entity. Culture actually goes on to many entities. It could be the culture of your race. It could be the culture of your religion. It could be the culture of the community that you live in. It's the culture of being a college student. Most students don't know that being a college student is a culture of its own. It's a challenging culture because the fact that you have all these other entities or factors that you have with you. Work, family, personal lives, and what other challenges that they come up with. And we're bringing those to the classroom and not realizing those are cultural understandings that we need to understand as well too. Engaging students into the educational environment by focusing on global learning and global language. Now, this is what I was looking at. It's not looking or talking about looking at Spanish culture, because that's half of what I am. I'm actually Cuban, so I'm not going to bring my Spanish culture in the classroom and saying this is what we're going to focus on, because it's not a Spanish course. But I'm also French as well too from my mom's side, and I'm not going to say, okay, well, this is a French class and talk about the French. What I mean by cultural language in this case is understanding how different languages and different cultures fuses our education together, how we make our sound appearance. We as individuals come with all these different things, and those factors actually make us better instructors because we understand what our students are going through. We also look and appreciate the connection that we have. And one of the things that I love to do in the classroom is connect my students and integrate what they're talking about, act on it, and then also react as well too. One of the things I've learned about global learning is a requirement. Having your students to talk about what they appreciate and how they bring those appreciations to the classroom. For example, I have one student right now who just spoke to me who said that from Poland, she learned math, how to do it, X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, that's fantastic. She said, but in the classroom here at Triton, the professor refused to listen to how she would approach it. And I'm like, that's wrong. Why would your instructor feel that way? Oh, he wanted us to do it his way. That's not right. So she felt alienated because what she brought in as an experience to the instructor was just useless. And that made her feel so bad. That's why she reached out to me. I said, no, you were doing fine. I said, the way you see mathematics is how you understand it. Your instructor just refused to see it that way. Not to say it's a bad thing, so I wasn't going to downgrade the instructor. I said, but I don't want you to feel bad when you go to class, because that's part of your life. That is part of who you are. And global learning, well, it's not just our students, it's also us as faculty members have to learn that as well too. We have to learn to appreciate everything that our students are bringing into the classroom. We also want to look and nurture our students as well too, incorporate those unequal world opportunities that we have. And I say that because after doing some research, and it was looking at the focus of teachers who maybe teach a history class or a language class or even an English class in this case, things that we've learned or they learn from other cultures and other worlds, train and put that in your classroom, because you may have international students who may appreciate that so they don't feel left out. That sense of belonging as well too. Then we have diversity and learning, which we think about is also preparing our students to live responsibly. We are living in today's society where we see all these different things that are happening not in our cities, but in our communities, but can also happen on campus as well too. as an advisor of our common ground, which is our gay and lesbian and straight alliance here at Triton College, I'm always talking about with my students or with the group of things that they need to appreciate, and so that they don't feel alienated, that they feel that there's their appreciation not only for the campus but for themselves, and looking at the responsibilities that they're going to have outside. And I say, for example, what we feel and what we do today may not be equal in another country, but it should never change who you are. But sometimes it does happen. It does happen. And adapting those things into the changing of our world. Oh my God, we are changing everly every day. Every day there's something new. There's a fight going on, there's an argument, there's something in the news, and our students will see that, bring it to the classroom, maybe have a conversation, and we need to appreciate that. And I think for me, as a math professor, I think that is actually world understanding, because they're appreciating those things and seeing how it relates to what they're studying. Currently, my class right now, which is my quantitative literacy class, we're studying logic. And one of my students brought in an article and saying, well, can this be approached in a logical form? And I'm like, you know what? That's actually interesting. Let's look at that and let's talk about it. Now, did it relate to the subject of logic? Yes. Was it something that was on my agenda? No. However, I appreciate the student taking the time to go out and look at an article to relate to something that we're talking about. I felt, and like I told my student, that's the definition of global learning. You're using that outside the classroom. And the article did not come from the United States. So that's why I appreciate it even more. How about not going too fast? All right. So another thing that I was looking at and doing some research, and I attended a symposium in regards to this, and saying that what instructors should do in the classroom, we should promote our learning environment to look at not changing our curriculum, but identifying things within our curriculums that we can add to, in this case. Have more opportunity to discuss real world problems. I know that most of us in this situation maybe teach disciplines like medicine, in this case, that may not have that. But not to pick on anyone, but we can fuse that. We maybe look at how a procedure is done in a different country compared to what is done here.
Well, actually, a good example is gender identity. When a physician has to examine a patient, is it important for that physician to know the biological sex versus anything outside that if somebody identifies as a different gender? Those are important issues.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely correct, John. You're absolutely correct. Could we also expand on that, how other countries may look at it differently as well too? And in a classroom like you that teaches science and medicine, that's actually a wonderful conversation. It may not have been on your agenda, but it did come out because it is something that's happening in our real world today. And you may have a student in the class that may identify with that and appreciate you taking the time not only to talk about the subject and not out the student, but talk about something that they can relate more to.
Well, they're going to encounter whatever their sexual identity is. They're going to encounter it, and so how do we handle those issues?
Mm-hmm. That's actually really good. Anyone else?
So, artificial intelligence is a big one. Really, basically trying to get more inclusive, backgrounds into technology. So, technology, from its infancy, was a bunch of older white guys, and that really kind of transcended. And even in some of my classes, the hardware classes, I identify one is there's when you have devices on a chain, on a connection, those devices are referred to as master devices and slave devices. So I kind of bring that out and say, this is systemic racism. It's being changed, but I want to identify this so you understand that given the time, these are people they thought it is. And another one is even like connectors. There's male ends, female ends, and there's what's called, if you want to switch it, they call them gender benders. So it's another one that it's just embedded in the discussion of learning it, but I let them know, is this right? No. But now with artificial intelligence, a lot of these engines are being trained by people that may look a certain way. And that is going to give you false outcomes when it comes to like profiling, when it comes to doing, research as far as crimes. You want to make sure that discussion is brought to the table, because if it isn't, you'll have bias in the technology while it's being made. So it's really something I try to tell my students about, to be cognizant of that.
Coming from information technologist background. I just want to say that so everyone and who's like, what did he just talk about?
Yes.
Let's keep going. All right. As an instructor, we also want to promote, in this case, within our learning environments, self-reflections. Now, I actually do this sometimes. I actually do it towards my students during their project, during their self-reflections within the paper that they have to do or the project that they have to do. And it's to give an opinion so that it's not just all me-based as the instructor. It's there as well, too. Cultural practices, sexuality, as John was talking about as well, too, and ethnicity and other forms of diversity. These things based on the Association of American Colleges and Universities saying that that's what global learning is about. Infusing these different type of, these factors into our curriculum, and then also within our discussions that we do. So you're right, Patrick, as coming from math, we do talk about those things, but one of the things I started, which is next month that we're doing, it is the appreciation of women in mathematics. So it is, this month is African American history, which is also due appreciation of mathematics. We're dealing with our African American. But next month is my really interesting one, because a lot of my students did not know that some of the theories and some of the concepts that we talk about in mathematics actually came from women. My favorite that we're going to be talking about is the first placement exam. It was actually created at a women's institution. Yes, I'm in love when they didn't even know that. And those for my female students, like, math is not my forte. It actually is. It's not in your sense of what you see right now, but it is part of who you are. It is part of your identity too. All right. So again, focusing on looking at some of the learning outcomes for global learning and diversity, or diversity in global learning. So I was thinking about some of the things that we may do within our classes. I looked at some of the classes that are being taught here and looked at some of the curriculum in this case, and thinking, what can we do in addition to that? So one of the things I looked at is integrating maybe some of the cultural languages and ethnicity lessons within our curriculum. I know that some of us in our different disciplines, especially like let me not, because I don't want anyone thinking I'm picking on them, because I do this in class. So in this, we may choose those things. So I'll pick with me. This month, like I said, we looked at, in this case for my logic class, we're looking at 2 African Americans who actually wrote theories in mathematics. It's all about logic. Next month is women in mathematics, since we're going to be talking about geometry and algebra functions as well too, not knowing that there's actually women who created these wonderful concepts that they didn't really know about. And then in the month of April, we're looking at the foolish of mathematics. I know, April Fools, but it's just to look at some of the concepts of how we think was not real, but is real, and how we use it and don't use it. And just going back to computer science, since I have a little background in computer science as well too. Expanding on their knowledge in the classroom as well too, using their understandings of how it relates outside the institution, because not everything is taught in a book. It is actually taught based on who we are, our culture, everything that we come from. And address the importance of global learning. So like I said, I tell my students, I want them to not only understand mathematics within the classroom being taught to them, but how they're going to relate it outside the classroom if they're having a conversation. If it's with a computer science expert or a tech, if it's with their doctor in this case, who may be sitting across from them, having, pondering, wondering what they're thinking of, and just having a conversation. Or you have that individual who just having somewhere tea outside in adult education and just don't know what to talk about. Engaging our students in a lot of different activities as well too, having them to collaborate with each other. I know this goes back to our best practices, but cultural learning and diversity learning actually does that. It actually gets people to talk about maybe their experiences, what happened to them, or how they approach it. In mathematics, we think, for example, we always think that math is done 1, 2, 3, and then that's it. It's not, because there's different ways of looking at it. A student may see the number 2, and I'm just saying, may see the number 2 and be, well, I write it this way, but then you have another student who wrote it a different way, but it's still the same 2. I know, not the best analogy, but I'm going to expand on this one. We were in a class talking about logic, and one of the questions was, Oliver Twist is the best novel ever written. And I had students who didn't even know who Oliver Twist was. And then I had students who said, well, this sounds like something I read a long time ago in a different country. And I said, well, yeah, let's talk about that. But it was interesting to hear about, especially when they said they didn't know who Oliver Twist was. And I'm like, it's a book, not a movie. But let's expand on both concepts. You know it because of your generation as a movie. Some of us knows it as a book, which is really a book. And I said, well, the question was, is it the best book ever written? Logically, we would argue and say it isn't, and some people argue and say it is. But that's what the whole purpose of the class was, to talk about logic, to create that argument, but also create that engagement as the students will talk about. So we also talked about an artist in this case as well too. One person brought up and saying, well, I think Beyonce is the best singer. As one person said, and I'm like, can you expand on that? I don't think so. I'm like, why? Their opinion in this case. But it gave my students to engage in the conversation. But it also gave them that global learning because not everyone thinks the same thing. You can't force someone's opinion on what you feel is good when it cannot be. And last but not least, creating measurable outcomes to relate to the content and the subject. So for me, for mathematics, like I said, it was all about logic and to talk about it, and I had my students to prove their logical point. But they also, in the next class, had to create a table to represent that logic as well too. Now, I also dealt with those students. I have 3 students who are taking philosophy. So they actually saw the connection with both of them in this case. All right. So again, like I said, I'm approaching everything in the sense of mathematics. In the mathematics class, I think global learning is all about linking the mathematics to real-world applications. So again, that engagement of having my students come up with different topics to talk about when we're talking about the subject itself. Linking mathematics to cultural events, different applications and methods. We were looking at one of the things in mathematics for all of you, which is called the 4-color theorem, is using 4 colors on the map so that they don't overlap each other. Now, in the discussion, we had this, which was part of our appreciation of mathematics. A lot of students in this case, they had to go back and do the same thing. And I said, did you realize that this actually came from the University of Chicago, or University of Illinois in Chicago? And one of my students said, no, it couldn't. That's an older. I said, yes, I'll use like Patrick. Yeah, it was 2 older white men who created it, but who says it couldn't be modified based on hue? They use primary colors. Yeah, and you have to define what primary colors were, but they use primary colors. But who's to say that you have to use only primary colors? The ideal of it is you as a mathematician, you as a student can create anything you want. It just has to approach it that way. Linking different means of math education and math literacy, because again, that's talking about how math is taught in the classroom here with me as the instructor, but sometimes can be taught differently. I usually have maybe a student, that's why I have in my classes for all of you, is called the secretary. The secretary is the one that comes up with some of the different ideas and saying, well, John said, for example, he did it this way in the group, professor, so can we do it this way as well too? Does it come out to the same answer? Well, yeah, it does. Yes, Math is not just a one road. It's many diversities in the road, as long as we come to the same answer. Using the social learning model, the social learning for all of you is all about communicating with your peers and communicating with your students and discussing the importance of that. And I use a lot of peer-to-peer interaction. I'm very fond of that. I would say that one of my colleagues, in this case, who visited my classroom, thought my class is always laughing because they're always engaged in everything, and he couldn't understand why, since I was next door to his class. And I said, because I have them expand on it, because learning should not just come from the instructor, it comes from all of us in this case, because we see differently how we teach. And in practice, flexibility. I know, you're thinking, how can this deal with diversity and global learning? Because we have a diversity of our students and how they learn. And sometimes we have to consider those things, those models of understanding, those models of learning. We have one person in this case that is a visual, so they have to have that visual of understanding. And then you have that person who is an audio. Love to talk, love to. I know, I'm kidding. And then you have that individual who will just read everything. But then we also have those individuals who are a combination of all three. So sometimes we have to be flexible with that. And my definition of being flexible may not be where you change the assignment due date, but have some flexibility in how the student may approach what they do. Because again, we all may see it differently. An example, I remember 3 years ago, I was doing my class was doing a project. It was a research paper. And one of my students said, you'll love this, that 0 is a number, both negative and positive. I said, really? How can 0 be both negative and positive? She's like, Professor, you're just not understanding what I'm saying. When I go to my bank, it has nothing in it. That's negative. I said, okay. I said, so if you, please give me the positive. She's like, well, if I have nothing in my pocket, that's positive because I don't owe anybody anything. I said, thank you. She's like, what? I'm never going to forget that. I thought 0 was just 0. But thank you for elaborating that it's both negative and positive. And then she said, yeah, I use it in science class. Really? I said, again, thank you. It was the best conversation for 30 minutes, and my students and I could not stop laughing. But I validated her point that she saw it differently. I would have never thought of being in a bank account. If you have nothing in there, that's negative. And then nothing in your pocket, that's positive. I said, thank you, and thank you, and thank you. And I said, I will never and ever forget it. I had to share that one because I couldn't wait to share it with all of you under flexibility because I was flexible about it. I still didn't give her a passing grade on that paper, but 0 was neither negative or positive. But I appreciated her logical thought behind it.
A little bit of creativity.
You're right. I just couldn't. Oh, but thank you.
Well, you know, that's good that you say that because I think there are some teachers that would have given her full credit for that. Quite frankly.
You're probably right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I just couldn't.
Well, I'm with you. There's a reality that we all live in.
Right.
We're not all in bizarro world.
You know, I wish if those who are on Blackboard would see this, because sometimes I do the same thing. I'd be like, you know, there's days I would love to do this, but I just can't because you can't change the number. just can't. 0, you just can't change it. But let me be the Southern that I heard. God bless her soul. She graduated from Trident learning that 0 is neither negative or positive. I'm glad she learned that one. For me as a math person, I'm including the racial, ethnicity, class, gender, and all the experiences in the classroom. So again, one of the methods that I started doing in this case was introducing different people, not only white, old mathematicians, but other mathematicians that we have. It's our cultural diversity that most of my students never knew that exists. All they think of, I love when we had the conversation about who's the father of algebra, and they said some old white guy. I said,
Well, it's like when Hidden Figures came out.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think a lot of people were really taken aback by that, having no idea that not only do we have women involved in those high-profile events in history, but black women as well?
You're right. You're right. In fact, when I was teaching math for elementary educators, 1 and 2, one of the things they had to write about was a book or a short story that was written by a different ethnicity. So I remember one student actually commented on that and saying about the book. I was like, okay, tell me how the math was incorporated. Tell me what you experienced from reading it, and tell me how you would incorporate it within your life outside this classroom. And I had to go back and read the paper because I was only requiring 2 pages, but she wrote 6. So I was actually thrilled because she wrote a lot. And being an elementary school teacher, she appreciated that diversity comes in all forms, and there's not just one way of thinking in this case. So thank you for that, John. I just remember that as well too. Also, having one of the things that I was thinking about, I tried one semester, is I had students to research salaries from different places, how much they would get hourly, and they had to include 5 countries, and including the United States, and see the difference in that. Now, one of the things that one of my colleagues, when I mentioned this at a presentation, they were saying, well, Tron, how is that? That would be more economics. No, I said, but it's math. Because of the fact they're going to look at not only the wages and the salaries, which is part of looking at mathematics and looking at the numbers. Because, for example, if a person here in the United States, let's say, and I'm just throwing this out here, let's say a person in the United States is a clerical worker and getting $19 an hour. You go to a different country, that's not the same. So what would be the difference in that? Why is there a huge difference in the wage itself? Yes, it did look at more the economics of it. It did also look at the cultural difference, but it also have to appreciate, in this case, that what most students think that, oh, I'm getting paid less here. Yeah, but other countries may get paid less and less and less than what you're doing. And like most people in this case would complain and saying that, well, yeah, our items, in this case, if we're talking about economics, are being brought over from a different country and they only get paid 2 cents an hour. Yeah, this is not economics class, but the mathematics, yeah, is that right based on, and how is that? You're working 2 cents an hour, which I know is not realistic. Every minute they're getting what? That was what they had to do, is break it down in those forms.
Well, it's very practical. I mean, moving from one state to another.
Oh.
Determining whether you can afford it, given the cost of living, the standard of living, and all that other stuff.
You're absolutely right, John. In Math 101, I know, we do this a lot. I have to thank my colleague for introducing me to teach it for the first time. She's no longer here. But in Math 101, one of the things that we talk about as well too is the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index. Yeah, most of my students didn't even know what that meant. They thought it was like an acronym for something totally different, which one person said, and I told them, please don't never repeat that. And I said to them the same thing. One of the things that they had to do was buy a house in 4 states. And within each state, it had to be in 4 different cities to see what the consumer price index would be. For the same house, they would purchase here in their home city here in River Grove or Melrose Park, Franklin Park, and etc. And you're right, they noticed that. And then one of the things that I also had them to do too is look at the salaries as well too for a position that they're getting. And I said, you know what, I use myself. I said, as a college professor, let's go to the labor of statistics and I'm gonna show you what a college professor makes. Now, at the time, I was part-time, and I told them, this is how much I'm getting hourly. I have to say, I fudged it a little bit because I don't want them to really know how much I'm really getting. But I gave them a number, and they were like, oh my God. I said, yeah, but that's here. Let's go to a different state, and another state, and see what the difference is. Now, why is that important? Well, because there's also cost of living. There's other factors that we have to think about. I say, yeah, mathematics in this case is not looking only at how its applications are used, but understanding the logic behind it as well too. So again, that was just one of ideas that I had as well too. Promoting cultural awareness and appreciation. Yeah, I know that I can't do this much in the classroom with food and music and crafts and entertainment, but I try to use those different genres and problems to appreciate them as well too. Allow opportunity for international students to speak his or her educational discoveries. Right now, I have two students who are considered international students in my math class, which is my college math 110, which is college algebra. And they were telling me, well, in my country, we did it this way. And I'm like, oh my God, I love that approach. I said, you know what, I'm gonna fuse that in my education because I would have never thought of doing it that way.
I can give you a really good example. I teach statistics too, occasionally. And I had a class where I had a student from Spain. And on my statistics, one of my statistics tests, I used playing cards as an example for them to figure out the probability of getting a certain hand.
Mm-hmm.
And this student had never seen a deck of cards, never used a deck of cards. I had to quickly, while they were taking the test, I said, have you ever used dice? Yeah, I've used dice. So I converted it to a dice example real quick just for him. Because he had never experienced playing cards. He didn't know what a full house was or, anything else.
All right. And we as instructors sometimes, and I don't want to group us all, I would say some of us, in this case, assume that students understand it.
Right.
And
I had no idea there were people out there who never experienced cards.
And I remember, like right now for my Math 80, which is math literacy, going into Math 101 and 102, one of my students who's an older adult was saying, we were talking about statistics because they're doing a little bit of statistics as well too, and marbles and dice and everything. And he said, well, Professor, how is this going to really help us in the real world? And I said, you know what, there's actually 3 movies I could think of that you could look at. And the first one I mentioned was 21. One of my students said, oh, so is that about our age? I said, no, it's about if you go into Vegas and getting blackjack. I said, please correct me if I'm wrong. And then I said, it's getting 2 cards to equal to the value of 21. A pause, a look.
They never experienced it.
One person, you're right, one person said, I don't gamble. I said, you really don't have to gamble. I said, in fact, let me expand on the movie itself. It actually started as a club game of seeing if they can do that at MIT. What? No. Yeah. Why? I say, because it's all about probability in mathematics. I'm reminded of the young lady, I'm looking right at her right now, but she's not here. And she looked at me with the sassiest look on her face and saying, I don't get it. I said, okay. So I showed a small clip of it based on the commercial of it. I said, that's all mathematics. I said, you just have this guy who's just brilliant at mathematics, who just being exploded or exploited because of his ability to make sure he can count cards. And I said, counting is against the law. I said, but we won't go into that. But counting is part of mathematics. And I said, we count all the time. He's just doing it quicker. Nope. I said, okay, well, have you seen the movie Matilda? She's like, oh yeah, my girl watched that. I love that one. I said, you know Matilda had mathematics in there. No, I didn't. Yeah, I did. As I smiled behind my mask, she told me, no, I didn't. Now in 2 minutes, we're going back and forth, so I had to show her a clip, and she's like, wait, that was math? Yeah. So math is in everything? Pretty much. Now, I love using these examples because I tell students I remember them always. And exploring different differences and experience in learning. And again, it goes back to my student who told me, and like you, John, as well too, saying, well, I don't know what cards are, but you referred it to a dice and made him understand it. Those experiences may help him to understand maybe later on. And hopefully, I'm praying that my student in this case now looks at movies and think, oh my God, math is everywhere. I want to tell her the last one, the third example I had, I said, even named a movie after a math symbol. She's like, what's that? Pi. I said, it's a math symbol, and it's a long decimal number that no one in this world will ever memorize. And it's like one person said, no, it's 3.14. I said, it's longer than that. Much, much longer. Three of my
I
students.
think the world record is 2,000 figures, if I recall. Something like that.
Yes. There's even a YouTube video that keeps going and going and going. I showed that in class, and one of my students was like, please stop. I told you, it's kind of going. I said, in fact, there was a mathematician in this case who believed that you could solve world hunger based on the pi values. I said, ooh, that brings up another movie where it was called Numbers, where they figured they could discover world events based on numbers. I know, I'm just full of, just keep going. Global learning, in this case, also deals with dealing with those icebreakers that we have in our classroom. I use one a semester I love, which I don't use every semester, an icebreaker based on diversity. So I would use, in the beginning of the class, I would have each table with a different country on it. And as they're sitting, the students don't know the country until they flip over the card. Now they have to give something about their experience with that country. Diversity, have discussions about diversity in mathematics. Like I said, I'm a math teacher, so we always talk about how it's diverse as well too. The cultural and global understanding of mathematics, which is used in everywhere, I celebrate that. Using students' prior experiences and cultural knowledge in solving problems. And also, as all of you will get a copy of this, there's a link that gives a document that you can go through as well too, to give you some different ways of how to approach it in your classroom settings as well too. And some additional ideas of how you maybe want to fuse global and culture in your classroom. So at this time, I know I did a lot of talking. They feel that my colleagues and then helped out as well too. I want to open it up to any conversation about global learning and global and cultural learning. Yes, John.
Are you aware that there are some colleges in the West Coast? I just read this. I didn't go into any detail, but what I got from it is that there's this notion that students are being taught that there are no right answers. And the idea of right answers is associated with white privilege. Have you encountered that at all?
I remember reading something about that. I spoke to one of my friends who actually teaches in California, and he was saying that he kind of believes in it, but he changed it a little bit in the sense that it's not so much as white privilege. I'm trying to remember, he was saying not so much as that, but he was just saying it was the right for everyone to have an opinion. And that opinion should not be forced, it should not be challenged, it's an opinion. And that we all should share and acknowledge that opinion.
I wouldn't want to focus on that when I'm teaching pharmacology.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the drug is supposed to be 2 milligrams per milliliter, I suppose students can have an opinion about that, but there's an objectively correct calculation.
You're right. Calculations in this case, you're right. Like I would say when I was teaching math for meds, you can't change the calculation because you're looking at the weight of that person and also the other things that are associated to the equation for that particular medicine or whatever. So you can't change those things. You can have an opinion about it to yourself, but you can't change it. And I think what he was thinking of, because he teaches history, he was thinking of it in the sense like that opinions do count. Even though he does encounter, I love this, he does encounter times where it has to be controlled of what people say, because when you give them too much freedom, he said, especially when you talk about history, particularly some types of history, someone always brings in what they've had in the past or something that happened to them, and they twist what it was taught. And I say, yeah, I can see that. I say, as a math person, I see if the equation is this, could you have an opinion about it? You could, but mathematically, if it doesn't come out to the answer that is being asked, then you have to prove why you got that incorrect.
Yeah, I was curious what your perspective was. If you had heard any, there are a lot of people who have no idea that that idea is floating out over there.
It is, and for all of you who are here, it is. John is correct. It is starting on the West Coast, and actually it started in the state of California. I know my state that I came from, it's
I used to live in
obviously,
California, but I was born in Oregon, and that's where I first encountered it. Some schools in Oregon are promoting this idea that there really is no right answer. And I don't know how they qualify, because I didn't look into it very deeply, but because math is your thing.
I'm thinking they're looking at it in the sense that, like I said, math, I have not, in the math, because my friend who teaches it, he's in history. As a math person, I really could not see that happening. I really couldn't. Hopefully it'll be one of those fads that will just fade away in this case, because it was probably one individual who thought, oh no, we should do it this way and think it this way, and then it exploded, but there's no real reason behind it.
You know, I had an interesting experience when I was a young college student, and I was taking college algebra.
Was that only 10 years ago?
Oh,
Yeah.
I have white hair, you know.
Oh, 15 years ago?
Anyway, no, it's probably 40 years ago. So,
John, you could just say thank you.
yeah. But I remember the professor, he was very good, and he taught very well, but he posed a problem to the class, and I was the first to get it right. But he didn't like my mathematical process. And I thought to myself, I don't know if it was not elegant enough for him or whatnot, but I followed, you know, I got the answer. I used the proper rules and everything, maybe in a different order. I don't know what it was that he didn't like, but it just struck me. I just thought to myself, well, who gives a rat's tail how I got it? I got the right answer. I didn't violate any mathematical rule.
So, go ahead, please.
I was gonna say, maybe that's what the whole thing, I've never heard of that in California, but I teach English, and so when they have a paper due, or when they're interpreting a story, I encourage them to give me an alternate view. My opinion of what happened in the story, or the details in the story, are not, I mean, they're solid, but they're not, the be all end all. So give me your opinion. So maybe what California is trying to say is not that the solution, not that there's more than one solution, but maybe there's more than one way to get to the solution.
Or maybe how interpreting. So another good example is, students, my wife's a librarian, and I'm okay doing internet research, but you need to use other sources. And this is a known statistic. If anyone cares to guess, how much of the internet is indexed on Google search engine, percentage-wise? There's actually, how much would you think is indexed? How much of the internet, if we do a Google search, how much does Google know about?
Maybe 10%? 5%?
4%.
Really? I would have said more.
4%.
I would
I
have said 9, because it has to be less than that.
So I tell my students, I'm like, that's a known statistic. Let's discuss that. Wow.
Wow.
There's a lot out there that's not indexed and Google does not know about. So you need to take that into consideration. So that's a numerical value. You would think that, wow, it should be 50 or 80. No, it's very small. It's based on it's based on an algorithm that applies relevancy. Well, again, here's another discussion. Who wrote that algorithm? How are they using it? Is there maybe bias in that algorithm?
Well, we know
There is
has
bias.
been analysis done. There is bias.
Yes. So that's part of, I think,
A lot of
maybe the
bias.
bigger discussion is, how the structure, how it's built, right? I mean, you could talk about that,
Right.
but you're not. The statistic is a statistic,
And
right?
you're right, and I say the same thing when next semester, when my students are going to be doing their research paper, only 1 or 2 things can come from the internet. Because I explained that everything that you're going to be looking for may not be in the internet. I know we think it's the wonderful, and like I do, as you probably do too. I tell them it's a wonderful database.
Yeah.
It just doesn't include everything.
Yeah.
I said one of the things that we looked at is one of the mathematical theories. They only found like several things online about it. I said, but there's this old form of books that have them too. But I also tell them too, there's other search engines that you can use, like Epic, and there's other professional documents as well too. Even peer review documents, even though they're not really into that.
Digitized. Think of all the stuff that isn't
Or even,
digitized.
so we're like, in the library, there's databases that librarians use, and that's like, I mean, check out Yuli at the library, she's awesome. She made this awesome guide for my Linux class, and stuff I didn't even know about. But she knew where to look, and she knew where to curate this information. And it's actually on Triton's webpage, or Triton's library page. So things like that, have them go to the library, do research that way, and it's really amazing what's out there.
Oh, we actually, for next semester, it's incorporated into my syllabus. It's called the Library Research Day. We actually go to the library because of that. And hopefully, if Rob is there, because Rob is the one who does the presentation, and he'll talk about it in the class, he's like, your professor gave you a detailed list of what he's looking for. And in that detailed list, it says you can only use 1 or 2 articles from the internet. So the question will be like, where do we find the other thing? That's where Rob comes in and explains, there's other places you can go and get this information. And while this semester is going on, for all of you, for the fall, I'm actually doing it now. So there's days I'm going to go over there to the library and say, okay, here's a book. I'm going to write it down. So then just in case if a student says to me, well, professor, we couldn't find it. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Because I already saw it.
Didn't know. You just didn't look at the right place.
Yeah. Exactly. So I've been thinking it's one of those things that hopefully it just fades out. And my colleague who teaches there as well too, even though, yes, I was born there. I went through K through 12, but then after that I left. I never, most of my education, my schools, everyone's opinion mattered. It wasn't just like, everyone's really.
Well, I'm old enough that my undergraduate and my graduate education, that wasn't available. So I spent hours and hours in the library. When I got my doctorate in theology, I was able to do it without going to the library because so many things have been digitized now. And it's possible to get a degree without ever cracking a book, I think, today.
Oh my God, John. My student, bless his heart, last week told me, he said, my coach uses all these big words and it's just confusing me. I said, did you just listen to maybe the contents he's listening to it or saying it? Maybe you'll understand it. I said, you know what will help is reading the book. Oh, I only read half a book. Wait, what? I said, your entire life, you've only read half a book.
Right.
Say it again.
I teach English, and at the beginning of every semester, I ask them what's the last book or the best book they've ever read. And I've had students that have never completed it.
I'm just
Well,
my mind.
I am
K through 12 education is a great challenge. I have students that can't operate with signed numbers. And I teach statistics. I just say, I don't have time to teach you that. You just have to put the calculator in the right order, and come up with the right answer. And I tell students, I said, it's not your fault necessarily because you weren't exposed to it.
You're absolutely correct. I mean,
the students today, and when you consider, when do we double knowledge? Like every couple of years now? When I was a student.
You mean like data? Yeah. So basically like data growth you're talking about, like how much data?
Well, but even the find the data and information, the actual information. Yeah. When I was a college student, when I graduated from college in 1985, my commencement speaker was a general. He said, the statistic is we double knowledge every 4 years. So 4 years from now, you're an idiot again. Basically is what he said. And I think it's probably more exponential than that.
Yes.
And so there's so much information, just weeding through it to find the relevant stuff, the true stuff.
Mhm.
That's really,
And,
that's a challenge.
Right, it is, because
Yeah.
then one of the things that I would do, especially for the research paper I'm doing it, is that we talk about what's good and what's bad when they go to the internet, thinking, oh, okay, so I'll show them an example of one of the books that my math education class had to read, which was called Secret Lies in Algebra. And I said, this is a wonderful kid's book. I'm saying, using this as an example. It talks about suicide, but it talks about how this young lady figures out how her friend committed suicide by using math to do that. So I tell them, okay, here's the physical book. Yep, this is what it looks like. And I say, here's the internet version. I said, so let's go through how many pages that's on there. On the internet version, there's actually 4 pages missing. And I said, so would you use this in the sense of as a content of what you're talking about, rather than actually comparing it to the physical book itself? And most of my students said they use the internet because it's much easier because they don't have to go anywhere. And I said, but yeah, you're right. It's not everything is going to be
it's
there.
easy to rely on it so much.
It is
Yeah.
easier to rely on.
It's so convenient. If you've got good databases and you got good information with databases, that's great. But
And that's the thing about going to libraries, that they understand that Google is not the only search engine out there. There's tons of search engines as well too. But you rely on, which I say in class, when they'll say, "Oh, Professor, I'm just going to Google." You're going to Google something. It may not be there, So, and like, it's not the only one that's there. And
It's a
I
good
say that coming back
starting
from
point. Yeah, it's
a
a
computer
good
science
start,
background
yeah.
as well too.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just, and it really in the back end of technology, because my day job, I manage infrastructure in a company, and the new database type is no SQL, no structure. So the reason being is these data chunks are so large, you can't structure it. It would take you years to structure. So basically, you're going through using these algorithms to parse out the information, and there's a lot of times where it doesn't get everything. So they're still trying to figure this out, how they parse these large data sets, and that's, to your point, I think it's every 2 years we've doubled everything we've ever written in history.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to index it? You can't.
You're
It's
right.
impossible.
And like I tell students with algorithms, I say it's a person that's writing that. So what if they don't know everything? So therefore, that 0 that should have been a 1, they mixed it up. Now the system is trying to figure out exactly where it's at. They can't find it.
Yeah.
Can't find it. I was just giving wrap it up.
Good discussion, though. Really good discussion to have with your
Yeah.
students and just with
Right.
peers. You need to have the
You do need-
You do. So here at the end, I said for professors to focus on is more of our best practices as well too. Encourage your students to maintain their identity within their culture. Change your teaching and assessments to reflect the diversity within your classes. So sometimes you may not want to use, like I do, I will change the name of the person because we'll use those templates of tests or assessments, and it always has those wonderful names, John. Sorry, John. No offense.
are you saying that my name is not wonderful? Is that what you're pointing?
That's not what I'm saying. Not what I'm saying. But it's
It means God's gracious gift in Hebrew.
yes, it does. But it's a common name. So I'm
It
thinking
is.
of, like, I had one semester, I love saying this, I had a Ladasha. I am not joking. So I put her name and represented it on the paper for the exam. And I do that by changing and having it inclusive for my students.
Yeah.
So I'm having my students included. One of my favorite that I made up, I want to say this, Gutierrez, I would use because it's a made-up name, a mixture, and I love just using that. But it's to say that in my class that everyone gets recognized. But that's me as well too. Identify different classroom engagements, behaviors. So sometimes we may always focus on we as the center of attention rather than the student center. So having our students actually facilitate in this case, which is what I do. Also have your students work together on projects, because sometimes their ideas and concepts are different from all of us, and we may learn from that as well too, and your students may learn from each other. Encourage your students to work with other classmates. One of the things that my math literacy class is going to do, they're going to be doing a walk-around survey. So they're getting their classmates involved in the survey so that they know it's outside the classroom as well. Create a learning opportunity for your students to use collaborative work. Tonight, my class is actually collaborating on one of the projects that they're going to be working on. I shouldn't say project, just an activity. And last but not least, demonstrating relevancy to peers and faculty. We as faculty members learn every day. We're lifelong learners. I hope we are. So exchanging our concepts and what we do in the classroom may reflect on how someone else can use it in the classroom. Thus, my appeal for the CTE, my hidden advertisement. So thank you, all of you. I know that I'll get this out to CTE, so if you want a copy of it, please do complete your survey for them. Again, my hidden commercial as well too. And as we end this broadcast, I want to say thank you, all of you. Thank you for allowing me to talk about my passion, what I do in the classroom as a math professor. Thank you for allowing me to bring in examples, not only from my classroom, from my life as well too. And I want to thank all of you because I appreciate everything that you do here at Triton College, and I appreciate you as an individual. My ending speech for this semester for my students. Thank you.